What is fate? The Tyranny of Chronology, a philosophical inquiry into historical fate. There is one thought which must often recur to a man of my age. I was 51 years of age when the Great War broke out. Had I been 20 years younger, it is highly probable that instead of living to write this book, I should have found a grave on one or other of the battlefronts before my 35th year. A man of my generation can never forget the monstrous stroke of fate which fell on those who chanced to be born between the years 1878 and 1898, or think of the scores of thousands who went to early graves in the Great War without feeling their fate to be a reflection on his title to be alive. Still more so, if he took any part in public affairs and had any responsibility, even indirect, in the shaping of the policy which was a sentence of doom for so many of his juniors. By J. A. Spender. Quotation from War Guilt, an essay in modern English prose, English Essays Anthology, Gomal and Peshawar University's book for advanced English students. The concept of fate has been eternally draped in the garments of agency, the capricious gods, the weaving fates, the divine plan. This anthropomorphism is a profound act of existential comfort, a way to impose a narrative of intentionality upon the vast, indifferent machinery of time. To remove these garments is to confront a colder, more absolute truth. The most inescapable destiny is not authored, but indexed. It is chronology, the brute, unalterable coordinate of one's existence within the causal sequence of history, that constitutes the primary and most tyrannical determinant of the human condition. To be born is not to enter a story with meaning, but to be inserted as a transient variable into an equation whose parameters were set eons before consciousness flickered into being. This is the foundational metaphysical injustice. Consciousness, with all its capacity for hope, love, and terror, is distributed with cosmic caprice across the spectrum of historical epochs, its quality hostage to a chain of antecedents stretching into a past, over which the individual holds no sway. We are sentenced by our birth date to a pre-existing world, its conditions the verdict of time itself. I, the ontological prison of epoch, consciousness as a historical product. Philosophical inquiry into the self has long circled the problem of free will versus determinism, but it frequently commits a critical omission. It considers the self in abstracto as an entity confronting choices within a neutral present. This ignores the prior and more profound determination, the ontological framing of the self by its epoch. The self does not emerge sui generis. It is catalyzed within a specific historical, material, and epistemic reality that defines its very horizons of possibility. A consciousness awakened in Sumeria circa 2500 BCE does not merely have different thoughts than one awakened in Enlightenment Paris. The very structure of its thought, its cosmology, its understanding of causality, its conception of the possible, is fundamentally shaped by the world it inherits. The I is not a sovereign architect of its experience, but a tenant in a prefabricated ontological structure built by the labour, wars, ideas, and accidents of millennia. This transforms the classical notion of fate from a spiritual or cosmic directive into a material and historical precondition. Fate is the sum total of the world's givenness at the moment of one's emergence. The Roman child on the Danube frontier in 378 AD is not fated by prophecy to die in a Gothic raid. Rather, his existence is an emergent property of a dissolving imperial system. The political failures, economic pressures, and climatic shifts that precipitated the migration period are the real authors of his brief, terrified life. His individual consciousness is but a localized awareness of a systemic collapse. He does not live a life so much as he inhabits a historical symptom. His fate is to embody, in his suffering and death, the terminal phase of a civilizational cycle. The tyranny here is that his most intimate experiences, fear for his family, the pain of a wound, are not truly his own in origin. They are the inevitable human output of vast impersonal processes. 2. The nihilism of the antecedent chain. Aspiration confronts blind process. The profound philosophical horror of chronological determinism is most acutely revealed when the chain of causation manifests not as human conflict, but as blind, natural or biological force. Here, the human project of meaning-making, the drive to weave a coherent narrative from one's aspirations and actions, collapses entirely. In the face of pandemic or climatic catastrophe, the individual is not a tragic hero undone by a flaw, but a statistical inevitability undone by process. Tragedy implies a meaningful arc, a fall that illuminates some truth. The victim of the Plague of Justinian experiences something more nihilistic, the utter irrelevance of their interiority. Consider the young merchant of Constantinople. His inner world, a vast, subjective universe of memory, ambition and love, is philosophically no different in kind from our own. It represents a unique point of view upon existence. Yet, this entire universe is rendered null by the arrival of Yersinia Pestis, a mindless replicator following the logic of biology and trade routes. His dreams are not thwarted, they are erased from the historical record as if they never were. This exposes a chilling truth. The universe is not merely indifferent to human striving, as existentialism would hold. It operates on parallel tracks that can, at any chronological intersection, obliterate the subjective track without a trace of recognition. The individual becomes a mere vessel in which historical, biological, and climatic vectors momentarily intersect. Their suffering has no why beyond the mechanistic explanation of antecedent causes. This is fate stripped of even the dignity of narrative. It is pure casualty, the reduction of a soul to a circumstance. Similarly, the 14th century European peasant, caught between the geophysical determinism of the Little Ice Age and the biological determinism of the Black Death, exemplifies the default state of historical existence: vulnerability to cascading systemic shocks. His life asserts a grim philosophical principle. Peace is the anomaly, suffering the latent norm. His existence argues that the baseline condition of human life across most of chronology is exposure to forces that render individual agency and aspiration quaint, if not pathetic. Our contemporary experience of stability is not the triumph of human mastery, but a temporary and precarious stay against this underlying deterministic chaos. 3. The maelstrom of geopolitical time, the self as a drafted soldier. In the modern era, the tyranny of chronology often wears the guise of geopolitics, a web of human-made, yet no less deterministic forces. Here, the antecedent chain is one of ideology, political failure, and technological advance. To be born into a certain decade within a certain geographical coordinate is to be conscripted into a narrative whose script was written long before one's birth. The individual life is not a story authored by the self, but a subplot within a grand, often violent historical novel. The young man born in Afghanistan in the mid-20th century does not choose his role as mujahideen, refugee or casualty. That role is prescripted by the collision of Cold War ideologies, the brittle nature of post-colonial states, and the historical pathologies of empire. His consciousness, with its capacity for personal love, familial duty and spiritual yearning, is forcibly annexed by history with a capital H. His fate is to live out the logical, devastating conclusions of decisions made in distant capitals by men who saw his homeland as a pawn on a strategic board. This illustrates a key philosophical point. Geopolitical time operates on a lag. The consequences of decisions, ideologies, and technological innovations, like total war or globalized finance, unfold over decades, ensnaring generations who had no voice in their creation. The individual becomes a living manifestation of this lag, their life the human material upon which abstract historical forces enact their conclusions. The German youth of 1915 is equally drafted. The vortex of nationalism, the humiliations of Versailles, and the economic chaos of the 1920s create a psychic and social vacuum that his generation, by sheer chronological accident, is destined to fill. Whether he becomes a fervent Nazi, a reluctant soldier, or a victim of the camps is, to a terrifying degree, contingent on the smaller variables within an overwhelmingly predetermined trajectory. His choices are selections from a menu authored by history. This exposes the illusion of autonomy within the storm of collective fate. We are not captains of our souls when our ship is already caught in a hurricane generated by the climatic sins of our grandfathers. 4. The ethical imperative of chronological humility. Acknowledging the tyranny of chronology does not lead to passive nihilism, but to a profound and necessary ethical reorientation. If our peace, security, and opportunity are not the fruits of our virtue, but the dividends of our lucky place in time, then we are living on borrowed grace, funded by the suffering of those born into less fortunate eras. This realization should birth a deep chronological humility. The millions who perished in the 30 Years' War, the Middle Passage, or the Great Leap Forward were not lesser beings. They were contemporaries of a different, crueler time. Their screams are the silent foundation of our relative tranquility, a reminder that our civilization is built not only on genius, but on vast, unmarked graves. This humility imposes a dual mandate. First, it demands a radical compassion in the present, directed especially towards those who, even within our ostensibly fortunate age, are born into pockets of chronological tyranny, war zones, failing states, environmentally ravaged regions. They are living our historical past or a potential future in our present. Second, it instills a sovereign responsibility toward the future. We are now the antecedent cause. Our actions, policies, and systems are writing the deterministic script for generations to come. To thoughtlessly exacerbate climate change, propagate corrosive ideologies, or dismantle institutions of peace is to consciously design a future chronology of tyranny for souls not yet born. We become the indifferent authors we once railed against. V. Conclusion. The narrow margin of meaning. We are, in the end, not authors, but interpreters, handed a text, the world, that is largely pre-written. The plot, the setting, the major conflicts, and the available roles are gifts or curses of our birth date. Within this overwhelming determinism, however, lies the narrow but sacred margin of human freedom. It is not the freedom to choose our era or our overarching narrative, but the freedom to choose our stance within that narrative. It is the freedom to inject compassion into chaos, to seek dignity within desperation, to build small shelters of meaning against the gale of historical process. The tyranny of chronology is the ultimate equalizer and the ultimate divider. It binds us in our shared vulnerability to time's lottery, yet it fractures human experience into islands of vastly different fortune. To confront this truth is to abandon the myth of cosmic justice and to embrace instead a more difficult and urgent justice. The ethical imperative to widen the circle of those who experience the miracle of peace and to tread lightly upon the future. Knowing we are crafting the fate of those who will one day, with equal bewilderment, find themselves cast onto the stage we are now, however blindly, constructing. Our fate is given. Our legacy to the chronology of others is the one true choice we make.